Hi, my name is Luke, and for our final presentation, we'll be comparing the business negotiation styles between the US and Japan. On the agenda, first, I'll cover the historical and cultural roots that cause each country's negotiation style to be the way it is. Secondly, we will cover the people, process, and problem analysis, followed by recommendations to American businessmen if they want to do negotiations in Japan. So Japan and the United States are two very different countries, very different histories, and this leads to the negotiation strategies being different. In my research, the main 2 points that I found different was that the US is based in a Christian and individualistic mentality, while Japan has been influenced by Buddhism and Confucianism, leading to a collectivist mentality. Some specific historical points that have led the United States to be the way it is first, like I said, the founding in Christianity. So the settlers were originally coming from England to escape Catholic persecution as they were Protestants, and they had a very strong, individualistic, hardworking mindset. This was because they believed that good works got them into heaven, and as well, when you're settling a new land, you need to build everything for yourself. So it was a strong sense of self-reliance. Secondly, after the Revolutionary War, the United States needed to negotiate the founding of its own country. So after the war, the people were fairly skeptical of a strong central government, as they had just dealt with defeating the king. But James Madison knew he wanted a stronger central government, and he wanted to ratify a new constitution. So at the Constitutional Convention, he was able to accomplish this by, instead of framing the negotiation as how should we update the current government, to what's the best system of government we can create. And through this, he was able to get the new Constitution ratified. This founding story gives Americans a strong reverence for negotiation and its powers. These next 2 points can be considered maybe the negative side of American negotiation culture. First, being manifest destiny. What can be taken should be taken. So during this period, America was expanding west and taking land from the Native Americans who lived there. They did this because they were more powerful and they saw it as their destiny to reach from sea to sea. So often negotiations during this time were extremely unfair, extremely one-sided, and the US broke many of the contracts that they made with the Native Americans. Finally, in the modern day, the US is a hegemonic political power, and this leads to often negotiating from a position of power. There's this quote I liked from the United States Institute of Peace that reads, "While American diplomats tend to see themselves as tough but fair bargainers, most foreign practitioners regard the United States as a hegemonic power that is less concerned to negotiate than it is to persuade, sermonize, or browbeat negotiating countries into acceding to American positions." And while this quote is referring to the political aspect, I think that many American businessmen carry the same mindset into business negotiations. Now moving on to Japan. Japan has a much longer history than the United States, starting out with influences from China in both Confucianism and Buddhism. Confucianism has instilled a strong sense of hierarchy in Japan, and in this way, negotiations in Japan often move up a company's hierarchy. Buddhism has also instilled a mindset of group thinking and unity. This also results in strong sense of community during Japanese business negotiations. The third point is clan warfare. For a long period in Japan's history, many warring factions have been fighting over power in the country. And during these periods, obviously loyalty to your group and to your clan was very important. This leads to modern Japan having a strong devotion to family and perceived in-group members, such as co-workers. The last point I want to discuss is the Meiji Restoration. In 1868, Japan went from a traditional society to quickly adopting to modern technology and modern ways of governing. So they adopted Western-style economics, education systems, and political systems. And now this all happened very fast, and Japan industrialized very quickly. The result is that the country grew strong and modern, but the people were the same as the ones that lived in the traditional society. So the traditional mindset stayed strong within Japanese culture. And this influences today how their business negotiations go. Now let's take a look at some of the more specifics and differences between Japanese negotiation culture and US negotiation culture.
I'll go through the differences of the negotiation styles between Americans and Japanese by using process, people, and problem dimensions. Firstly, process. We're looking at communication, negotiation process, and logistics. Americans' communication is clear, direct, and explicit, and there's an emphasis on articulate verbal communication, while Japanese negotiators use indirect and implicit communication and rely on nonverbal cues such as facial expressions, tone of voice, and pauses. These differences may create miscommunication, as Americans' directness can be perceived as aggressive, aggressive or disrespectful by a Japanese counterpart. When it comes to negotiation process, Americans tend to focus on the objectives of the negotiation, aiming to reach an agreement efficiently and timely. However, Japanese negotiators would prioritize building relationship and trust before diving into actual negotiations. They're also less strict on timelines and careful when making decisions. And Americans negotiators may become impatient with the slower pace, while Japanese may view haste as disrespectful or indicative of a lack of commitment. Logistics wise, Americans like to schedule meetings with clear agendas, and their approach to logistics is relatively informal. On the other hand, Japanese pay attention to formalities such as seating arrangements and exchange of business cards. The setting and conduct of meetings also carries significant symbolic weight. Understanding and respecting Japanese business etiquette can enhance mutual respect and facilitate smoother negotiation. Looking at people dimension, Americans often have the authority to make decisions, and decisions can be made quickly by individuals in leadership positions. But Japanese has collective process where collective input and consensus are required when decision making. American negotiators may expect quicker decisions, while Japanese counterparts may require more time to consult internally. Also, Americans value individual accomplishment and personal initiative, and they're motivated by personal success and recognition. Japanese negotiator focus on the success of the group and harmony. Thus, Americans may adopt assertive strategies, while Japanese negotiators may focus on preserving relationships and harmony within the group. Lastly, in terms of problem dimension, Americans, the motivations are driven by financial performance and competitive advantage, and they'll also use persuasive arguments and data-driven presentation and require detailed legal contracts. They'll also put emphasis on BATNA. However, Japanese negotiators are motivated by building long-term relationships and trust. They may also be less reliant on detailed legal contracts and use patience, silence, nonverbal cues, and indirect refusals to negotiate. This means that Americans will seek detailed contracts to mitigate risk, while Japanese may rely on strength of relationships and mutual understanding. Also, Americans could misinterpret Japanese indirectness as indecision, while Japanese may view Americans' assertiveness as pushy. So this is the key differences between the negotiation styles of Japanese and American negotiators.
Okay. Now that we have a good understanding of the differences between these countries' negotiation styles, I will go over some of their similarities, again, using the process, people, and problem dimensions. First, in the process dimension, we have communication. Both countries value clarity in communication. They strive to ensure that the other party understands the key points of the discussion, even if the modes of communication differ. This leads to a shared commitment to avoid major misunderstandings. Next, the negotiation process. Both cultures emphasize preparation before the meeting starts to understand the needs of the counterpart before entering negotiations. This gives both sides a strong understanding of their counterpart and, in a way, serves as a platform to communicate credibility and professionalism. Last, we have logistics. Organized meetings are valued by both the US and Japan. They use structured agendas and value productive use of meeting times. You can expect a punctual start to these negotiations. Next, in the people dimension, we have the decision-making mechanism. Both cultures involve key stakeholders who influence decisions or hold authority in the negotiation process. This leads to an alignment of objectives to improve decision outcomes. Next, we have interpersonal politics. These two countries use trust as a core component. Establishing trust with counterparts is a priority in both cultures, as it underpins successful long-term agreements and enhances collaboration. Finally, the problem dimension. I'll start with motivations and interests. Japan and US both aim for mutually beneficial agreements. These cultures recognize the importance of crafting agreements that provide value to both parties, which leads to a shared focus on win-win outcomes. Finally, we have the negotiation strategy and tactics. While the way these cultures handles conflict seems very different, there are some similarities. For example, both balance assertiveness with diplomacy, and they avoid unnecessary confrontation during negotiations. This leads to a constructive and goal-oriented negotiation.
Okay. In the last part, we are going to present a recommendation for the Americans negotiating with Japanese businessmen. As you can see the slide, we would like to offer some suggestions on the characteristics of Japanese business culture and how Americans negotiate in the four parts. The first part is decision-making process. The Japanese decision-making process has an important feature called nemawashi. This refers to the process of coordinating among related departments in advance to reach a consensus among all members. Therefore, the final consensus usually required multiple meetings and internal coordination, which take much time. Furthermore, in American companies, the person with decision-making right often attend meetings, whereas this is not always the case in Japanese companies. Even if it appears that an agreement has been reached at the meeting, Japanese companies often conclude the meeting with the phrase, "We will bring it back to the company and discuss it." This is part of the consensus building process necessary for a successful project and is not a negative behavior. American companies can effectively bridge this gap by sharing time management and schedules in advance when working on projects with Japanese companies. The next is Japanese communication style. Japanese culture is considered a low context and emphasizing unclear expressions and indirect ways of communicating. This is because they value harmony with others. As a result, it can be difficult to understand what is decided during a meeting. For example, there are situations where Japanese people use yes or yes a lot times during meetings, but these do not necessarily imply agreement. In most cases, it's confirmation that I understand what you are saying. Understanding this point is the first step in preventing misunderstanding. It's always a good idea to take minutes at the end of the meeting to document the agreement. Also, when confronted with unclear expressions, it's effective to ask, what exactly do you mean? And confirming with a soft question is effective. In addition, there is a unique culture of reading the air. This means taking into account the situation and the context and considering the other person's feelings. For example, the expression "this may be a little difficult" actually means no in many cases, but it also implies consideration for the other party. Understanding such unclear expression also helps smooth communication.
Talking about relationship building, high context cultures, including Japan, pursue long-term benefits. In negotiations that are not immediately favorable, it is better to build relationships and progress negotiations gradually rather than seeking immediate results. So in Japan, building trust in informal settings such as over meals is particularly important. There is unique Japanese expression, 同じ釜の飯を食う, which means to eat from the same pot, which signifies that sharing time and meals helps build long-term and effective relationships. So communication with customers or suppliers often involves sharing meals and drinking together in Japan. Even though Japanese people may separate work from private life, they place great importance on informal interactions for building trust and relationships. So we like to suggest that when Americans are invited to dinners or social gatherings by Japanese company, it is highly recommended to actively participate. This might help in building trust and fostering long-term effective business relationships. Understanding the process of building relationships in Japan may involve multiple informal interactions, and being patient and engaging in these activities can significantly benefit long-term negotiations and partnerships. So we are moving on to next chapter. So the final part of presentation, risk tolerance. For instance, Japanese companies might request additional data and documentation that American companies would not typically consider necessary for decision making. Before embarking on a new ventures, for example, Japanese companies spend considerable time in thorough examination and planning, emphasizing the importance of past examples. So we suggest to the Americans that when required for additional information, just do it and keep it in mind that the more, the better to foster more effective relationships. So to conclude, as you may know, as you understand, high context and low context culture may affect communication style. So by understanding and respecting these cultural practices and differences, we can build stronger and more effective business relationships. Thank you so much.